Hello, folks. How are you? It's been a while. We're here in season 12. And I'm welcoming you to On the Call, but this time it's Caribbean Heritage, Humanity, and Healing. I'm your host, Ozzie Stewart. And here in this space, under the label W.I.N.E, which stands for West Indian Network Experience, here Caribbean stories spark global healing. So now let's dive in. And here is where we speak with the Caribbean Basin. Every story leaves a mark. Every voice builds a movement. Now, the spirit of On the Call with Ozzie can travel with you, worn, shared, and supported across the world. Visit us for more merch on thecallpodcast.com/store. Check it out. Thank you. Hi, folks. Welcome to season 12, Wine segment. Conversations with Caribbean leaders, innovators, and expats, shaping culture, identity, and global impact. A space where the stories, wisdom, and lived experience of the Caribbean comes alive. I'm Ozzie Stewart. Let's begin. Oh, please like, follow, share, subscribe, drop a comment. Check out our membership page where you get some inside stories, and you're going to get one here today. On this episode, I'm shining light on Chancellor Greene of Guyana. Today, we sit with a Caribbean statesman whose life reads like a blueprint for leadership, service, and cultural pride. A little bit. Chancellor Professor John Edward Greene has shaped policy and people across our region. From his early career at the UWI, University of the West Indies, for those who don't know, to serving as Assistant Secretary General at CARICOM, to becoming the United Nations Special Envoy for HIV in the Caribbean, where he helped move an entire region toward greater health, rights, and equity. He's a bridge builder, the architect behind Panman, which is a global best practice partnership on HIV and AIDS. He's a champion of climate resilience, a voice for sustainable development, and now, as Chancellor of the University of Guyana, a steward of the next generation of thinkers, healers, and leaders. He has received numerous honors, including the Golden Arrow of Achievement in Guyana and the Order of the Yellow Star in Suriname for his contributions to regional development and health. Honorary Doctors of Law at UWI, PAHO/WHO WHO Award for Administration in Public Health, that was 2011. That's not so long ago, and other regional awards. But beyond the titles, he's a Panman at heart. As well as he's earned the higher order under CCH, which stands for the Cacique Crown of Honor, which is the symbol of excellence and service, granted in 2019. Turned professor, a man of deep spirituality and a lifelong believer in the Caribbean's capacity to rise. Today we explore the man behind the mission, his journey, his wisdom, and the legacy he continues to shape. So let's dive in. The first question is, consensus building is one of your superpowers. What have you learned about uniting people who deeply disagree?
It's important for us to listen to ideas that are diverse and to try to see if one could bring together the diversity into what I will call a coalition of interest. So it's important to listen, to learn, to persuade, and to be discerning of what that coalition of ideas could bring.
Great. Looking them in the eye with the persuasion, right? As Assistant Secretary General for Human and Social Development at CARICOM, you helped shape policies for an entire region. What accomplishment from that period do you feel made the most tangible difference in the lives of Caribbean people?
I think that that's a penetrative kind of question. There were several things, but I would say a couple stand out. And it really evolves from the first question you asked, how you bring things together. And in fact, I would say the most outstanding contributions that I could identify with are those that I brought people together and I worked together to deliver. So, for example, the Pan-Caribbean Partnership Against HIV/AIDS. That was something that was so important to the Caribbean at the time in the early 2000 when I joined CARICOM. It was really, HIV was a death sentence. So many people died of AIDS, and there was so many disagreements about the causes and so many kinds of retributions that result. And in fact, many of the people who could have done something about the disease swept it under the carpet for one reason or the other. So it took a bold endeavor on the part of CARICOM and its leaders. And I happened to be there at the time as one of the chief policy makers. And that's why I say that's where the bridge comes, to be able to be on spot at a particular time and to try to deliver a goal. And the goal of reducing HIV/AIDS was the passion of the leadership of the Caribbean. And I was just one of the people in the orchestra and evolved as one of the conductors. And I was very pleased about that because eventually over the 7 years that the disease was rampant, we were able in the Caribbean to perhaps achieve one of the best successes in any of the regions of the world. So much so that the UN Secretary General and the UN labeled the PANCAP as an international best practice. I feel very proud of being part and parcel of that orchestra that led to that outcome.
I think you might have answered one of my questions I was going to ask you, but that's okay. I'll still ask you anyway. It's very good. I'm going to say it. You might have answered it, but I'm going to say what I have here. PANCAP, ladies and gentlemen, is the Pan-Caribbean Partnership Against HIV and AIDS. It's a regional organization that coordinates the Caribbean's response to the HIV epidemic. It is a collaborative effort between governments, civil society, and international partners to provide a unified and structured approach to prevention, treatment, and care for HIV and AIDS in the region. It became, as the Chancellor has said, a global best practice model. The principles of collaboration made it succeed. Why were they uniquely Caribbean?
They were uniquely Caribbean for the reason that prior to PANCAP, although the CARICOM Secretariat was initiated to bring the Caribbean together in various ways, in education, in health, in sports, in culture, that mission was not particularly being achieved successfully. It was being achieved in principle. We spoke a lot about regional integration, but there was the divisiveness that still prevailed. For the first time, I think, PANCAP generated that spirit in which we had to do something about something as grave that was killing young people and our workforce and so on. And I think that was a coming together that was different. It was rapid. It had to occur. We had to raise funds. We had to ensure that people of all persuasion bought into the need to prevent this dastardly disease from spreading. But more important too, we had to bring along people who had a belief that this disease was a disease caused by evil people. And so you had to change minds. And you could only do that if at the highest level and people at the lowest level converged with a mission. And it was tremendous to see that that partnership, and you have illustrated the components of the partnership, brought together people at all levels. And eventually also, what it did was to bring together people from the judiciary, the faith-based organization, the civil society, the LGBTQ persons who were seriously affected by the discrimination and so on. Bring those people together in a coalition of interests. Phenomenal. And that's why I said it was something that was so exceptional in the context of regional integration at the time, because mostly we spoke of something which was aspirational, but now we were applying an aspiration to achieve an outcome.
To be there in those rooms, on the wall. So your tenure as UN Special Envoy to HIV and AIDS significantly shifted the region's response. What was the breakthrough moment when you realized the Caribbean could actually change the trajectory of the epidemic?
Okay, there are two things that happened and which must be admitted here. My predecessor as the UN Special Envoy was Sir George Allen, and he was the first inaugural envoy for HIV/AIDS. I, at the time, as Secretary General, worked closely with him, and so much so that we were called the Spin Twins, the Spin Twins for Health and Equity. It was important to state that because within the CARICOM Secretariat, with the connections with the prime ministers and the ministers, and he now branching out beyond that because he was there before me, to connect us with the world. What happened was that the Caribbean shone brightly, and the link between the envoy then and myself in the Secretariat, it was an important, vital dimension to achieving the goals. I wanted to say that because when I eventually succeeded Sir George as UN Special Envoy, I then needed to depend on the links within the Secretariat and within the civil society. But I did more than that because I benefited from the connections previously and was able myself, only coming from CARICOM previously, to be able to call on all those entities with which I had collaborated before as Secretary General. So in fact, now to answer your question more specifically, it is building on that experience that we were able to get the people, the parliamentarians, to come on board to try to see if they could amend the legislation which was so discriminatory against people with AIDS and in particular LGBT. It was on the basis of the collaboration that we were able to get the members of the educational branch of the Secretariat to move through educational and sensitization programs in the schools to be able to ensure that from the level of primary to secondary, people had a notion of the do's and don'ts of HIV/AIDS. And then we had the whole cultural domain to deal with, in which messages came to people through cultural events. It is important to note that through song and dance and those things, people get connected with a mission. And I saw it, and in fact, lived it during the period when I was UN Special Envoy. And that could really only happen because of the experience I had in CARICOM and the links I said I had with the previous Secretary General, Special Envoy, Sir George.
So you chaired CARICOM's Steering Committee on Climate Change and Sustainable Development long before climate became a global emergency. What is the single most important action small states must take now to survive the next decade?
You know, that is a most interesting question, because when we started the climate change, I would say, advocacy for the Caribbean, people don't realize that it was the Caribbean, the small states of the Caribbean, that really led the charge of 1.5 to stay alive. It's now a mantra in the international relation. We are getting above 1.5 CO2 in the air would be detrimental to the cause of eliminating the effects of climate change. And this was done very early, and the reason we could do it is because the scientists in the Caribbean, the scientists in these small islands came up with the tests and came up with the empirical evidence. And it was presented, I remember, in 2009 at the COP, which is the annual meeting on climate change. And they presented that to that climate change conference of the UN in 2009. And in fact, it now is really ratified by the scientists all over the world. But I have to say that I was very pleased as chair of the CARICOM Committee on Climate Change that we led that charge. And sometimes if you don't say it, people wouldn't know it.
Correct.
They would think that this thing came from some foreign source outside the Caribbean. But I needed to reinforce that. And there are people who worked on it, like Neville Trotz, another Guyanese who went to work with the climate change community in Belize, who led that kind of research with UWI researchers and researchers in the Office of Ecology at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, as well as in St. Augustine in Trinidad and Tobago. And those are the people who came up. So eventually, they got an honor from the UN together with the Gore Commission, the former vice president, who took up the cause of climate change and made it an international mantra. And within those people who were honored were several colleagues of mine from the University of the West Indies. So what I'm saying to you is I wanted to connect up with the theme of this, W.I.N.E. Okay,
yes.
The West Indian mission is alive and well. Yes. The West Indian mission also in climate change led to small states' involvement in the decisions of COP, leading also from 2009 to 2016 when the UN adopted the climate change agenda in 2016. And 192 nations of the UN signed on to the thing. And then there was the Paris Agreement. But that is moving beyond. Yeah. But I just wanted to say,
absolutely,
it is a link between 2009 and what we are now seeing as the manifestation of the articulation of climate change.
So proud of our
Exactly.
Caribbeanites.
Exactly.
Having taught and served across 3 UWI campuses, what do you see as the next frontier for Caribbean higher education in producing leaders for a rapidly changing world?
Well, you know, when we look at the ability of the higher educational institutions, and I could speak for the University of the West Indies as well as the University of Guyana, and I witnessed the strength, the character of these institutions, especially during COVID, in the transition that they had to make to an educational system that went online
Right.
within 3, 4, sometimes less than that
Right.
period, months.
Once, yeah.
One had to do it because people were in session. They had to learn. You couldn't give up. And I saw the resilience. And I saw how, in fact, these institutions, the University of Guyana and the West Indies, converted a disaster into something of a victory, because it was a victory to be able to deal with the transition to online education and to produce people out of the COVID period who now have gone elsewhere and won scholarships at Harvard and Yale. And I would tell you later on in this discussion, and to even outperform those people from the Caribbean. Okay? So I am saying that I'm linking what happened in a period of dire, almost destruction, to evolving as leadership in education. And this then leads me to answer your question more directly. I believe that the Caribbean higher educational institutions need to make a greater connectivity in the way they approach education globally. And by that I mean need to coalesce more in their collaboration with each other. And to believe that this could be as strong as collaborating with institutions outside. Because we have proven that there's the talent. For example, more recently, the University of the West Indies and the University of Guyana have joined together in a program that is called Deliberations for Change Through Understanding Geonomics. Now, and that is an instant in which the Caribbean medical scientists have come to the view that many of the cures that we inherited, say for cancer or for, not so much so, but more so for the non-communicable diseases like diabetes, those cures which we've inherited from medical practices in the metropolis are not necessarily compatible with the geonomics of the region. We have different cultural styles, different cuisines, and things like that that affect us differently.
Right.
And the heritage of slavery, for example, and indenture, these have made a difference into how our lifestyles have evolved differently from those in the metropole. So this geonomic study is to say, what are the things that we can do that are more local rather than inherited from medical practice overseas that could help us? Not to say that we shouldn't really connect with the medical practices from the metropole, but there are certain specifics, and therefore here is where we get to medical products produced in the Caribbean. The dealing with the benefits of certain foods, to the diets that we deliver. And here again, in 2007, the Caribbean undertook a study, the Caribbean Health and Development Study. Again, it was coordinated by Sir George Aline while I was Assistant Secretary General. And that study has been phenomenal in helping us to understand how we should really perform and produce our various economic and cultural things to deal with non-communicable diseases. And that particular set of the Caribbean, what is called the Caribbean Development and Health Commission, that commission created a basis for the United Nations in 2013 to proclaim that as a best practice, which is now really recognized throughout the UN system. That study, and that again originated in the Caribbean out of trying to collaborate. And that was a collaboration of top-level medical, social sciences, economists in the region, that study. I said that because I come back to the fact that I think we need to continue to do more of that collaborative work and the indigenous knowledge that it creates as a best practice that could be identified globally.
Do you think, therefore, that these results or accomplishments need to be made more, need to be said, be spoken of more in order for people to see the result, for people to really collaborate?
Exactly. I think, I don't know why.
There seems to be a silence.
Yeah, I don't know why our cultural, our political, our economic history isn't having greater vibration internationally. Individuals shine. For example, we have someone from the University of Guyana, an alumnus, who became the lead researcher for the Pfizer vaccine.
Really?
Vidya Rupchan, a Guyanese graduating from the University of Guyana, who then came up, did a master's, but then was taken up by Pfizer, and he became the lead researcher for Pfizer and the vaccine. I say that he is one of the people that saved the world.
Absolutely.
But these are stories that we have to tell.
Right.
These are things that we have to ensure that people know about.
Yeah.
And not only people in the world, people here in the Caribbean.
Correct.
We need to make sure that they know they could produce. I'll
people
tell you.
can aspire to do those things as well if they know, they just see themselves.
Exactly, exactly. Very often, I, about 4 years ago, I had, as Chancellor, conferred an honorary degree on Clive Lloyd, the famous cricket captain. And he said something to me: we don't tell our stories. And he said he was with 2 cricketers, one of whom was the great Sobers, Gary Sobers. And some young cricketers came up and he said, I want to introduce you to this gentleman. Do you know him? And they said no. These were under 19 cricketers who had just won a competition. I only illustrate that to say something is wrong with the way that we portray our history, and we don't telegraph it sufficiently so that people are inspired by those stories. They know them. Imagine 19 under 19 cricket champions not knowing Gary Sobers on site. Okay, they probably knew him by name, but not on site. So it's part of the story that I'm trying to portray.
There are people out here doing things. There are expats from each country doing things. We need, I concentrate on expats for wine as well as Trini Corner because I feel Trinidad should be taking care of those within. These people who have left, they're still doing things that are impacting our homeland.
Sure. And you're quite correct. You're quite correct about that.
So this is my passion. What is the Caribbean's greatest untold contribution to global development in your eyes?
I would think that I almost said cricket until recently. But that is something of the past. But I think I have an experience by being the chair of the University of Guyana Foundation, which is broadened to the Caribbean and the diaspora, because I see the diaspora as having such a phenomenal human resource impact on their respective communities. And I would say the Caribbean's contribution to the global thing is the phenomenal assets of its people in the diaspora. And for that reason, I think it has a propensity to do much more of promoting the Caribbean and of ensuring that the voices of Caribbean people are heard in the respective diasporas in which they live. And I want to give a shout out here in Washington, D.C., a group led by Miss Claire Nelson, Dr. Claire Nelson, lobbied the government at that time, Clinton, the government, and lobbied to get Caribbean Heritage Month into the calendar. June of every year. Maybe it would be obliterated in this present regime. I don't know. And I don't know if June we had it. I can't remember. But in fact, Caribbean Heritage Month is something that puts the Caribbean as a whole on the map in the USA. Now, that is an illustration of the fact that we have a vibrant community that contributes to the development of the USA, but also in doing so, it brings into the fore how the connectivity between the US and the Caribbean, how that is so important. And what I'm saying is that you asked the question, what is the contribution that the biggest? And I would say our people who live here and who can make a difference and who, in many cases, have made such great strides and differences for this particular country.
Amen to that. Now, as Chancellor, how do you balance academic tradition with the urgent need to innovate, especially for a generation that must navigate AI, climate risk, and a globalized economy?
Well, you know, this is so important. I think that we, first of all, if we look at our having to navigate I would call the fourth revolution, which is AI. It's upon us. In fact, if I were to go on my computer and I say, do you know Aussie? You know, and I have to give a little more thing. Aussie might come up. But if I give the surname, then it would spew out within minutes.
Seconds.
Yeah, within seconds, yes. Almost everything about you. Some might be wrong, but generally speaking. Now, the reason why I say that is it's very important for us to recognize that AI is upon us and that we need to be able to deal with the impact of AI, recognizing the value, but also recognizing some of the ethical queries about it and confront it. Well, I was very, very pleased with the University of Guyana that introduced an AI component to its curricula at the end of 2023. And now it has been completely entrenched into programs related in particular to science, but also related to the arts. And it has engaged the students in a learning process that is really inspirational. Students who were so weak in mathematics have now been able, through AI, to build on their weaknesses and become very competent. So I'm saying that AI does have great value when it is used properly, but we realize too, at the same time, the ethical concerns about AI. But in fact, most of the things that are innovative require the challenges of dealing with ethical problems. And therefore, it seems to me that I go back to the need for universities to collaborate much more, especially the universities in the Caribbean, on how they deal with innovation like AI and how together they can formulate policies that really deal with the ethical issues. So in my case, I think it is a really tremendous asset for us to try and embrace AI, recognizing the need to deal with the ethical issues. If we were to deal with the thing on climate, that becomes something which is most important. And I say most important because in the Caribbean, we suffer from the effects of climate change for which we have the least input in the world. But in fact, here again, with countries like Guyana, who has just become oil-rich countries, we need to see how we balance the whole fossil fuel industry, for which there are great gains, and there could be great attributes to being an oil economy. But at the same time, build a future in which you create the basis for sustaining a green economy within the context of fossil fuel. Because this will not come as a second chance ever to Guyana and small countries that have discovered oil. But what they need to do, again, just like with respect to AI, manage the effects. Not this time is not ethical effects, but manage the health effects of climate change based on fossil fuels. And I'm glad to see that in the Caribbean, our engineers, our engineering departments, both UWI and UG, we are collaborating on how you develop the response of clean energy and how you use alternative devices for future manning of the products, of the industrialized products from our societies. So that there are pros and cons, and as long as we recognize them and we deal with them, I think we could embrace the challenge of climate change in the Caribbean, recognizing that we suffer most when we don't create the problems. But I want to say one thing that is happening, and I'm glad to see that the Caribbean countries are leading this at the present COP30 in Brazil, in which they are really saying the answer to climate change for us is really climate financing. How you finance the fallout of climate change to build resilience. So that, for example, the last Melissa hurricane in Jamaica created great havoc to the fisheries industry, to the tourist industry, how you build back. And I was glad to be able to read that one of the Jamaican economists who now works at the World Bank was able to develop a system of climate financing which will help Jamaica to build back in as short a space of time as is possible. Now, those are the innovations that you require. You have to say, I can't stop climate change tomorrow, but what I can do, I can build the resilience about climate change. Right. And it is a Jamaican person who stood at the frontier of that innovation for not only Jamaica, but it now is a model for small countries like the Caribbean. Right. And then you asked me the question about the global economy. Mm-hmm. And we recognize that in the context of the global economy, we are minuscule. And therefore, I think it's now important for us to ensure that within the Caribbean, we build the viability of Caribbean economies. We ensure that we get Caribbean people to move more freely and to see the Caribbean as a whole, not as Jamaica or Trinidad and so on. You could maintain those, but in fact, it's how you vision the Caribbean in the future of the global economy. And a report came out from the UN 2 days ago, which is really critical for us small countries. It tells of a situation in which the global food security and food poverty is spreading. There's something called strategic goals for the world to 2030. And what the UN report is showing, by 2030, double the number of people in food security will exist than those that existed at the beginning of 2015. And you know what it would cost the world to invest in reducing food poverty? $93 billion a year. $93 billion a year is 1% of 21.9 trillion budget of the United States alone.
Right.
So in fact, if we think of the global economy and we think how people treat the global economy as vital to individual parts, an investment only of US, if US were to invest only 1% in food poverty, it will create a situation in which we eliminate food poverty. No, but at the same time, guess what's happening? The US is cutting out aid through US aid to deal with HIV, to deal with health, to deal with poverty. So, in fact, what I'm saying is this world economy could be a bitch because what it does is enhance the value of the economies that are rich at the expense of the countries that are poor. And in particular, even if you didn't think of countries as rich and poor, you think of the world divided of rich people and poor people. And this was something that happened during COVID, where in fact, the countries in Africa, and to a less extent the Caribbean, could not afford to bankroll the need for effective medicines for COVID because the rich world bought up the stock and left little. And therefore, the effects of COVID on the world were greater for the smaller countries, the poorer countries, and the richer countries. So when we talk about the global economy is fractured because the rich world, as is the case of climate change, is not investing in climate financing, which would help the whole global climate economy. And the same thing is happening with the global economy of poverty. Because poverty, as was demonstrated recently in the United States, is spread sometimes in the United States itself. Look how many people, as a result of what happened with the lockdown, required food support across the United States of America. So it's not only in the developing world, it affects the developed world also. So equity becomes an important aspect that we will deal with programs related to the global economy. And that's how I see it, okay? And the Caribbean...
How do you fight back what is happening now in terms of the decrease of the help?
It's very difficult, but there are some lessons that we could learn. I think the world is less and less revolving around the fortunes of the United States. It is recognizing that. And therefore, countries are forming blocks of support outside of the US. In fact, one has to recognize that the US is perhaps the most prosperous economy in the world, and that diplomatic relations must continue to go on with the US. but that's not devoid of economic relations that could go on outside of the United States in support. So to answer your question, I believe that I see a silver lining for this. Most countries now are creating blocks of support. So, for example, the EU and Southeast Asia, the Caribbean and Africa. Right now, the Exim Bank is supporting a fair amount of projects through an initiative of Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, in linking Africa with the Caribbean and creating a bloc that didn't exist before. At first we thought, oh, Africa was so backward. But now what we are learning is that the resources, including financial resources of Africa, are substantial and could be drawn upon as an alternative to our dependence only on the U.S.
But there is also that situation where the Chinese has invested a lot in Africa. So how does that work?
Good. That is an excellent question, because what has happened through the neglect of the U.S. in investment, because you asked what is going to happen now that they have withdrawn. They have left the door open now for China to be the next hegemonic power, okay? And that is going to really create difficulties for the United States as the leader, the economic and cultural leader of the world. It's starting to happen already.
I thought it was been happening for a while now.
It started to happen. For example, if I take the country of Guyana, Guyana has now built a bridge across the Demerara River, spanning 7.5 miles, built by the Chinese. Guyana had appealed to the U.S. 10 years ago, and the negligence led them to China. The same thing is happening across the region, and that is why I pointed to the Mia Mottley initiative with Africa and Africa's Exim Bank, which now helps us to avoid having to go through the U.S. for development aid. But you're correct. In doing that, however, we probably are tying the region more to China with its own development strings and strangleholds on countries, because we know that China is in this for the long haul.
There's a big debt to China in a lot of the Caribbean islands. And now with Guyana finding their oil, it's said that Guyana would probably emerge as the most self-sufficient island in the Caribbean.
Yes, I think the same report from the World Bank to which I refer, it only came out 2 days ago, so I haven't been able to explore it in depth, but you read the abstract. And yes, Guyana is emerging as, if not the country with the greatest possibility to be self-sufficient, it is by now the country with the most propensity for self-sufficiency. That's big, because if this happens, it means that the Guyana, within the Caribbean context, managed properly, could again create the possibilities of a viable Caribbean food security economy. Because Guyana leads the food security basket within CARICOM. So what I'm saying is what I reflected on about a couple minutes ago, that I think that we in the Caribbean collectively could make some very critical responses within the context of a global economy that is so inequitable.
You founded Diplomats Without Borders in 2022 with 22 members.
Yes.
What global need were you responding to? In other words, what gap did you see in the world that made you feel you needed to create this organization? And how does this organization strengthen diplomacy beyond political lines?
Right. Well, when Diplomats Without Borders was inaugurated it was inaugurated during COVID, but it was with a vision that we wanted to create greater peace in the world. We wanted to create a situation in which diplomacy was the basis of generating good outcomes for the world rather than war. And you would recognize that in that period, you had a series of wars, among which was the one in the Ukraine-Russia war, which taught us some important lessons, that peace could only be achieved if one were to create a world in which, as I indicated before, in which people listen to each other and try to get conversions rather than divisiveness. And I think that we were at a stage where, under the former administration, there was that possibility. A US, a great economy, willing to speak with people, to achieve.
To listen.
And to listen. But right now, and this brings me back to the mission of Diplomats Without Borders, how do you try to refashion that world in which people try to find a diplomatic rather than a solution of divisiveness? And that creates getting to leaders, getting them to understand, but not only leaders, people in the civil society who know their rights and who could advance those rights independent of what government authorities are doing. And we saw some of that happening here in the United States, the No Kings movement. You saw it when the women's rights movement. And in fact, you saw that it created a vision outside the normal politics in which women emerged as leaders. Among the leaders that took us through AIDS were countries led by women, if you think about it. And so what I'm saying is about Diplomats Without Borders, now I did the analogy, let's now answer your question.
Right.
I think that it was really 22 who founded it, and now we are 100. And the importance of Diplomats Without Borders is that it is not seeking any aggrandizement for the movement. What it's seeking to do is to create among the current diplomatic corps the energy of using diplomacy to resolve problems, to achieve peace, and to ensure that this thing that we call multilateralism, of which the UN is a core, is strengthened. There are going to be fissures, there are going to be people who will want to destroy the UN and destroy multilateralism, because what it does is not create the energy for personal aggrandizement. But Diplomats Without Borders work within systems to, I would say, destroy those elements or to intervene with those elements of the destruction of peace, of which, if I may depart from diplomatic training, one of the greatest challenges to that kind of vision is our present President of the United States of America. Normally, we stay away from making these allegations. But in fact, it is so evident, and I'm not saying anything that most sensible people are not saying. And therefore, Diplomats Without Borders, for me, provides a new level of visioning how the world could be saved from the destructions of tyranny and divisiveness.
Well said. Great masterclass right there. You spent decades championing regional integration. What does true Pan-Caribbean cooperation look like today, and what is still holding us back? You might have alluded to it in different ways, but just to kind of coin that whole thing.
Well, Pan-Caribbean, a vision of Pan-Caribbean is really one that does not only see the Caribbean in its geographic sense. So we know that CARICOM is the administrative arm of the Caribbean. But I think a Pan-Caribbean vision is one that embraces our diaspora and therefore has tentacles in countries in the metropolis, in which we converge with a common agreement about how the world could be sustainable. And this is where, in fact, we get to something that was conceived by the UN in 2015, the World Sustainable Goals, 17 of them, in which I think, in a Pan-Caribbean sense, if we vision that we want to eliminate poverty, we want to reduce climate change, we want equality in education, we want to ensure that we have reduction in abuse of women, because that's a very important thing for the region. These are things that can happen not only in a sense of our geography of the Caribbean, but in the tentacles that involve Caribbean people around the world to deal with these questions of ethics, morality, equity, and the whole range of things. So Pan-Caribbeanism for me is not geographic. It is something that spreads itself and embraces people of the Caribbean wherever they are. How do we achieve that connectivity? It means that we have to do much more than we are doing now with creating a Caribbean response to the issues that we deem to be increasing our financial stability, increasing the way in which we reach out and we embrace the people who are disaffected. And for this, I mean how we treat with our own problem in the Caribbean, the problem of Haiti, which is so understated in the world's passion to deal with peace and security. So in fact, what I'm saying is that it's not an easy question. And, you know, I don't think that we recognize how important it is for us to reach out and embrace Pan-Caribbeanism as an important thing that could save us in the future that we want to build, which is a future in this global world.
And you mentioned Haiti. In the global work with the UN, WHO, and the regional institutions, what have you found to be the most misunderstood aspect of Caribbean identity and capacity?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Well, I think that the smallness of the Caribbean really is something that we have to really fight against. And we are underestimated sometimes because we can't field multidisciplinary teams to deal with the myriad of problems that confront us all at one time. We just don't have the resources to do that. But what we have the intellectual capacity. We could demonstrate that the Caribbean could be, for example, a zone of peace, only to be disrupted now by the forces on display in the Caribbean Sea, outside of Trinidad and Tobago. And what then destroys our ability to act with consensus is any one prime minister, and there is one now, that does not see that creating avenues to destroy the zone of peace is really a destruction not only of one country, but the entire Caribbean. It means that it's fragile, and therefore it is important for us to recognize how we strengthen those bonds and how we prepare sometimes for distractions by one or two leaders. It's happened in the past. We thought that we were over it, but you see, it's reoccurring at this time. So how do we, the question, it's a problem. How do we plan to take that slack up? What do we do? And sometimes countries could be bought for very little. And sometimes, as in the case when, for example, the US invaded Grenada, some of our countries sided with the US in so doing. So what I'm saying is that it is not always easy to control for those things, but we sometimes need to prepare for them. And therefore it might be, as in this case, the Caribbean is standing with a cohesive voice -1.
Right.
And that's how we have to treat it.
Does that remind you of when Eric Williams was in and was doing form the Federation? And who was at that time? It was Jamaica, right?
Yes, 10 - 1 leaves naught.
Dr. Eddie Greene, in the Caribbean, there are certain countries in the Caribbean that if something were to happen, I have a friend who we interviewed last year, earlier this year in Grenada, who by chance had to be in Trinidad and for entertainment purposes. But it turned out that when he got to Trinidad, he started feeling something wrong. Something was wrong. Ended up being in the hospital. Had to have surgery right away, that sort of thing. I know that within the Caribbean, we have great health systems. They can be better. But in terms of the governing body of the health systems, how and what have we in place that we can look to that exists within the Caribbean basin that can help us with our health security?
Yeah, I would say that we have something which is at the heart of that possibility. In 2013, the Caribbean Public Health Agency was created. It started with the Caribbean Cooperation in Health, which was initiated as early as 1984. But the concept of the Caribbean, the concept of the Caribbean Cooperation in Health was one in which we would share information and we would try and develop systematic information. But nothing emerged that would have responded to the issue that you raised about portability of health in the Caribbean, because it was not until about 2013 that we started to establish the portability of health insurance in the Caribbean. What it means is that if a Caribbean national got ill in a country in which he is not resident, then the expenses would have been enormous. But by 2030, when we created the Caribbean Public Health Agency, we also created and established the possibilities of creating health insurance that would underwrite events such as the one. But it still has not matured fully. But in fact, what I'm saying is, if you take the long view from the establishment of the Caribbean Corporation in Health in the 1980s to now, there is a great advance, and the possibility that I would say in the next 3 to 4 years, you will have a portability of insurance. But this would depend on having something else, the free movement of people really initiated in a very serious way that would enable this particular event that you mentioned to be something that could be managed. But I want to speak a little more about the Caribbean Public Health Agency, because previous to 2013, when it was established, we had about different health agencies doing different things. And that event that happened was an attrition, an iterative approach, which happened out of, I would say, the advocacy of a group of people. And again, I want to refer to Sir George, who worked, and I started it when I was at the Secretariat, with the assistance of many other people who worked in agencies throughout the region, including one Prime Minister that must be singled out, Prime Minister Denzil Douglas, who was the Prime Minister with responsibility for health, Prime Minister of St. Kitts Nevis. He was responsible. And in that instance, we were able to advocate for a stronger regional system. And CARFA, as it is now called, Caribbean Public Health Agency, was recognized as the CDC of the Caribbean. So what I want to say is we don't talk about these things, but we have come a long way. And CARFA now is internationally recognized. In the context of AIDS, it was of tremendous value to the Caribbean. It saved the Caribbean tremendously with respect to its health consequences in terms of death. It provided health information that was systematic throughout the region. And it created the basis for a strengthening of the regional health systems. So now we don't have to go to places like India or the US or Canada or the UK for guidance on our health regulations, because we have people who understand the Caribbean. We produced people of enormous stature in the world. And therefore, CARFA is just the embodiment now. And I think we need to talk a little more about stories such as CARFA. And I implore people who have not necessarily gone on the website of the Caribbean Public Health Agency to do so, to see the tremendous, tremendous value of a Caribbean initiative with international recognition.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for that. Looking back on your journey, from academia to diplomacy to global advocacy, what legacy do you hope future Caribbean leaders will build upon, and what do you hope they will transform?
I believe that Caribbean leaders are well aware of what's to be done. We have to create a Caribbean region for a slogan that I think was created in 2000, a Caribbean for all. I think we have to create that vision and move it from a vision to a mission. A Caribbean for all would ensure that people coalesce around the values that champion Caribbean development and champion a Caribbean morality that is seen to embrace people regardless of their social status. And I think that the Caribbean leaders and the people in power, and those people in power are people who are really technocrats of great value, and hopefully leaders will continue to recognize them as important sources, not only of advocacy, but of technical implementation of technical ascendancies, as you might call them in the Caribbean. You know, in my youth, there were people like William Demas, a great economist, who provided the vision of how economies of small economies can perform in the world. Eric Williams, who promoted values, people who created the West Indies Federation, which died early but manifested itself in the CARICOM mission. Now, I'm saying that because we have institutions to build on, and we have capabilities that can enhance those institutions, but we need to build it with the spirit of this theme, a Caribbean for all. And I think that is where the value of the Caribbean would be resounding.
You need to put that into a song, into a drum roll, and put it out there in some way, Caribbean for all. Tell me a little bit, because we're going to go into some rapid fire questions in a minute, but talk a little bit about the youth ambassadors of the Caribbean and how it relates to intergenerational success and development.
Well, you know, you have touched a chord in me which has inspired my own role in the things that I've done in the Caribbean and with colleagues in the Caribbean. And that is to ensure that we embrace the youth in advancing our aims and missions for the good of the Caribbean. And I could only let you know that during my time at the CARICOM Secretariat, we inherited the concept of a youth corps for the Caribbean. But having inherited it, what we did was to develop it. And we developed the CARICOM Youth Ambassadors. The CARICOM Youth Ambassadors also were young people who are now themselves leading politicians, leading, like the Prime Minister of Dominica, who was a youth ambassador, the present Deputy Secretary General of CARICOM, who was a youth ambassador, the Foreign Minister of Suriname in the last government was a youth ambassador. And we have several others that are now permanent secretaries, justices of the courts, and so on. So in 15 years, because since I left CARICOM Secretariat in 2010, those developments have matured, and the youth ambassadors are now currently our leaders. And so you touched the chord because I thought that the year before I left CARICOM, the youth ambassadors put a report out, and it was called The Eye to the Future.
Ooh.
EYE to the future. And in that, what they elaborated was the way in which you need to create an environment which youth don't feel themselves disaffected from. And disaffection was really something which was a credo of the eye to the future. How do you create? And in fact, when you talk about intergenerational success, it means creating an environment in which people embrace the mission and they help to advocate for the mission. And you could only do that if you help to inspire people.
Right.
And what I said about the Caribbean for All,
Yes.
create in the youth that value of thinking of a Caribbean for All. And the youth ambassadors, I'll give you another illustration. During the COVID time, because that's when they were developing, we got the youth ambassadors to create their own program of how they would, in fact, assist in communicating with youth. What are some of the methods of prevention of HIV/AIDS and how they could help to create a message across. They did it in a way that not even the most ambitious, the most creative people of our ilk could have done. The messages, the way in which they helped to create the message among you, saved the Caribbean region of the worst effects of HIV. The youth ambassadors did that. So when I said you touched a chord, is because I see that intergenerational success as dependent on how over time you create that intergenerational connection of people with the values to save the region and create a Caribbean for all. Only that could save us. The youth are people in this AI age who understand most of how you can manipulate the platform. And I believe that we have to trust the youth to help us. I think they have the full sense and value of what is ethical and can create the passion of dealing with AI in a way that we can't deal.
Those youths at that time, were they from all the different countries?
All the different countries, all the different. And I'll tell you, the youth ambassador concept was delivered, was introduced by having 2 youth ambassadors from each country, a male and a female. I'm so happy to see that today it has persisted.
Wow.
And the youth ambassadors, when I listen, I always try to listen to their meetings. It is the most dynamic and creative of innovation that you can tell. And I think that the people close to me can tell you that of all the accolades that I have ever received, that I feel so passionate, came from the Caribbean youth ambassadors. They create, and I have it in my study there, a lifetime Caribbean youth ambassador. So I am young at heart because of the youth ambassadors. And I just say that because I think that the youth inspire me to continue to work as an intergenerational mentor. And I'm very pleased that, I'm pleased about that role. And I think that we, the elders, should continue to play a role in which we recognize how important the value of youth is.
I'd love to be in one of those meetings. So you're seen as Mr. Cool, like my father. I was told that. Can't ruffle the feathers, Where did that come from?
I don't exactly know, but if I had to identify a source, it would be, I think, my mother who fathered me. I lost my father when I was 10. And I think that I got into a situation when I had to come back into an environment in which you needed to be tough. And I think my mother coached me into being a calm person. And I'm so happy about that because I think it is any success that I probably have achieved had to do with a disposition that I may have had to cultivate, but having done so, I believed helped. You call me Mr. Cool, but sometimes underneath that cool is a bubbling.
Well, it's like the swans on the lake, right?
Yeah.
Look very cool, but underneath it's a ferocious spinning of
Exactly. But you know, it comes because I think I had good mentors. And throughout my life, I mentioned my mom as one of the mentors. She had to deal with me. She had to be a father and a mother. But I was so lucky throughout my life to have been able to have had people who invested in the kind of disposition that you need to help me along the way and create a basis in which you could deal with situations with equanimity. And you could see people, even you could see the good in people. In fact, sometimes people think I overdo it, but I don't. When I think of a person, even someone who may have been not evil, but destructive or attending to be to the creator, there's something even I could see in that person that is good. It's just something that has developed in my persona. And therefore, that helps not to ensure that you're not ruffled by minor things of this world, which may eventually be very minor if you think about it, and if you think of the world as a place of more good than evil. I always, in the morning when I get up, I look to see what the top level of the climate is, not the bottom level. So today I could tell you it's going to be 48 degrees and not 42 when you start out this morning. It is a disposition, and I don't know where I got it from, but it is something I feel blessed about. It allows me to deal with human nature with humor.
So here are the rapid fire questions. What's the upside of the COVID years for you? We know about the downs. What's the upside?
Innovation.
What is the joy? What has been the joy of your career?
Seeing people that I mentor succeed.
At this point in your life, what more would you like to achieve?
Peace and harmony with nature, and a world that I don't understand, but I embrace.
What's the most important lesson you've learned over your career?
To always listen and learn.
L&L, if you could have coffee with any historical figure, who would it be? Or tea?
I tell you, it would be Aristotle. But more contemporarily, it would be, and he's dead. Well, Aristotle is also dead too, Mandela.
Mandela. What contribution or achievement do you want to be known for in the end?
Really reaching out and reaching back and giving back.
What has been the biggest challenge in your professional life?
Struggling to ensure that I always did the best I could.
So then, what concerns you about the world today?
The vicious undercurrents of people who could do better.
What gives you hope?
Oh, the youth.
The youth. Come back to the youth. So, that, my folks, is Chancellor Dr. Eddie Greene, who loves to be known as just Eddie. I invite you now to the next chapter, which is for our after show, as we call it, that goes into our website only for members. But I want to thank you very much for being here, spending time with Dr. Greene, with Eddie. Eddie, thank you for allowing this space, gorgeous space and time, and your wife, Oriole. Thank you to the OTC team, to Cheese, please. And don't forget, you know, the like and follow and share and all of that wonderful stuff. But I always say, remember, when you're on your beat, stay on the sunny, sunny side of the street, be health conscious, kind to one another, and don't forget to give thanks for the little and the big things as we strive through to this beautiful life. Thank you for being here on the call. See you on ITC Inside the Call.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.